Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean here with my co-host Will Jones. David Adelman had his introductory press conference. As I mentioned on our last show, this actually happened. On the show before that, I was like, are we going to get one of these or not? After Adelman was just announced as the head coach. I think Josh mentioned that he kind of lets everybody go and unwind at the end of the season, but he had talked to Adelman, I guess, before Memorial Day weekend, and then just let him kinda take that long weekend off, and then they decided to have this intro press conference, at Ball Arena. Adelman showed up in a suit. What did you think of the general optics of all that? Josh was also in a suit, which he hadn't been in any of the previous 2 press conferences we've gotten in the last month and a half.
The optics seem really good. I am not someone who goes to Ball Arena for those things, obviously, but it was interesting hearing Adam's comments and just the DNVR guys' comments on it because they thought it was a little more like showy than other press conferences have been in the past, which think is like a kind of cool point. They were saying the Cronkies maybe don't focus enough on the presentation and how things are coming across, and we had pretty funny moments with Calvin Booth, maybe saying a little bit too much to certain reporters at times. So maybe a little more controlled and intentional about the introduction, which I'm happy for Adelman because I think it should be treated with a little bit of grandeur, so to say, and not just be like he was already here, so we don't have to do much. Like treating him like, you know, and
Right.
honoring him for getting this big job and his first head coaching job, and it's with the Nuggets. I hope that they do treat him well. And I mean, before we get to the specifics, I thought it
Yeah.
was like pretty good and positive. I liked how he sounded. We can talk about the ideas and what we agree with or not, but I think overall, like he sounded pretty good.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with that. In terms of the overall optics, now I believe Adelman's going to be the 23rd head coach in franchise history, so that's a pretty big deal. And as he mentioned during his press conference, there are only 30 of these jobs in the NBA, right? And he's got one of them, and he was very like he opened it with like a line that was like, it's gonna sound like I won an Oscar, but then he kind of goes into the list of people that he's kind of thanking for helping him get to this moment. And he treated it like it was a big deal. And I definitely buy that for him, especially a guy being the son of a coach. Like, you get how tough this job is, how hard it is to get one of these jobs, and he's at least outwardly treating it like a big opportunity. And he sounds pretty like fortunate to be in this position. So actually, on the point that you just made, Will, about the optics and paying attention to that, because yeah, he's been here, but now he's the head coach, like, things should be different. I made this point on 2 shows ago when we weren't sure if we were going to get an introductory press conference. It's like that would be really bad optics because it kind of sounds like you're treating it like nothing is going to change. And that might be the case anyway, but at least you treat it like, nope, we're getting a new head coach. Like, we have to acknowledge that, and talk about it as the we're forging a new path forward kind of thing. So fitting that the first segment that I've got here is, what will David Adelman do differently, right? That's kind of the general topic of the questions that he was asked at this press conference. The first thing that came up is what's going on with player development and how that stuff is going to start in the summer. Um, he talked about wanting to gain better alignment between the coaching staff, like as a whole, and the each player's personal player development coaches that all of these NBA players have. These guys are, worth millions of dollars, and they work on their skills both in the season and also especially in the off season with their own personal trainers and personal player development coaches. And so Adelman wanted to have more, I guess, alignment and active communication there. He really emphasized, like, yeah, guys are going to work on their games during the summer, but we need them to work on the things that we need them to be good at. Um, What was your impression of, like, that specific section there, where he's talking about what guys need to work on in the summer, and it seemed like it was more directed toward the young players on the team.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of what you expect. You expect that the younger guys are going to be working on the physical traits. He said, getting stronger with them. And it's not necessarily just the mental side, but the physical side that they need to start developing. And it's like you think of Peyton Watson needs to get stronger and bigger, possibly uh, Strother as well. Obviously, the internal development sent some red flags through all of Nuggets Nation, but there is going to have to be some internal development for sure, regardless of if they make some extreme change or not, like with Duran and those players. So, yeah, I think it's what you expect. I like that he talked about how he's going to have to check in with them more. And right now, maybe it's not the time 'cause it's so early, but at some point he will. But yeah, the summer, I think just overall the message about the summer and what guys need to do to improve their games was good. And saying you don't have to become an all NBA player, you just have to simplify things, come up with your counters, come up with those skills, work on the corner threes, basic stuff that they should be able to expect. And I like that overall. But hopefully the vets take note of that too and say, yeah, I got to work this summer too and come into the season in shape.
So that was definitely, another topic that came up with the vets, but I before we move on to that, I wanna pull a couple of quotes from the presser about the young guys. One of the things he talked about was, like, every guy goes into summer and, works on their game as if they wanna be an all NBA first team member. But he said, quote, "I want guys to simplify their game and master a couple things that they can do in games," right? Um, this is definitely, I think, more on like Duran, Julian Payton, as we've mentioned here. But I think Peyton especially is somebody who offensively, like, I think there have been a lot of people that um wanted to give Peyton as much benefit of the doubt over the last couple of years as as possible with respect to growing in his offensive game to the point where like we know where to use him and uh putting a little bit more of the blame on the coaching staff for like not putting him in a position to where we were enhancing his strengths, right? I think some people were like we should use him in the dunker spot more. Other people are like he's not a good finisher, like he shouldn't be used in the dunker spot. He should have the ball in his hands more. Well, he's not actually that great with the ball in his hands unless it's like in transition, and even then you're like, oh man, the finishing, right? So I do think that this idea of can we figure out what your strength actually is? Like, can you get to that point individually as a player so that we can actually do that with you? Like, so that we can actually use that skill in the games? Like, can you master one or a couple of things that that you feel confident you can absolutely do consistently in games? Like, that's the thing we've seen with Peyton and Julian to a lesser extent is just like so many flashes of like, you know, his sophomore year, he had this kind of free throw line midi that he was hitting consistently. That not so much this year. Occasionally we'd get a floater, uh, but the rim finishing on top of that being an issue is like problem. Sometimes we get cool ball handling flashes, especially in transition, where he finds like a good pass, and other times it's like, what are we doing? Everything looks completely out of control, kind of thing. And so finding that consistency, I think, will make the way that they can find that consistency is by focusing in on fewer skills. I'm
Hmm.
less worried about Julian in this sense, not just because he's constantly he talked to somebody after this press conference, which he was in attendance, about how I think it was Adam Mares who was there and asked him, and Julian said he's gonna be in Denver all summer and just commute home to Las Vegas on weekends. And,
Hmm.
he's a little bit of a teacher's pet. We kinda clocked that last summer as he
Yeah, he
spent
did
his
that
entire summer in
too.
Denver, right? That's not the only reason I'm not worried about Julian is because he is an offensive player, like, he's been working on these skills his entire, career up until this point. Um, so he's more inclined towards those skills, and it's more about polishing at this point. With Peyton, it's really like that development curve is steeper because he doesn't have any kind of, like, broad base of those skills to where he probably or any of us watching feels comfortable with him doing any one thing, whether it's catch and shoot, handling the ball, finishing a play. It's like, okay, we gotta focus on something here.
But hopefully, him talking about how they just need to simplify their game helps a little bit. Like, I don't know what he's been focusing on. I'm sure on some level he's working on his shot for sure because that's very important.
Yeah.
What else is he doing? Like rim finishing stuff. I don't even know. Like, all you have to do is really get that shooting up. I don't really know what other skills I need him to do at this point, just because of where he would be in the pecking order offensively. But he just got to be able to. I don't know what he needs to add to his game, but shooting would be awesome.
Because I think everybody needs to shoot regardless of what their particular strength is. And honestly, like, Peyton putting up the shot was less of my worry this season again, like, so many of my particular gripes with Peyton's, offensive development, could have been, like, largely forgiven, especially because he was only a third-year player and all of this, if he could just make his layups. Like, that's the worst things. It's like, that's
Just
the easiest
layups.
shot you're going to get. You're gonna get those opportunities because Jokic is gonna find you because other guys are gonna find you. We just need you to make those. And if you can't do those and you're struggling in these other areas, it's like tough, right? Next in this section here about what DA wants to do differently. Okay, I liked this. So Adelman talked about wanting to try out a lot of new things offensively, especially in training camp. This is whether or not these things work and they like keep them or kind of discard certain plays or actions that are run for guys and whatever. But I like that he sort of framed it as like, I want to give these guys, especially the ones who have been here for a while, something to come back to that excites them. Like he used that word excites them. And I do think, as much as this is something I felt like Denver was a lot better about in 23, there were a lot of things just kind of run for to be fair, for guys that had a little bit more skill. You had like KCP had his like free throw line midi that was always run for him. Bruce Brown, freelanced all over the place, especially, in transition. And I was never worried about like, is Bruce going to get touches kind of thing. When you have guys, especially the ones that have been here for a while, doing the same things over and over again throughout the years, it's less exciting to come back to training camp. And I think he's trying to at least up the vibes for that like early part of the year. Like, okay, I'm gonna get involved in like a different way. We're gonna try out some things for me. I don't know how that's actually gonna manifest. And even Adelman was like, we're probably gonna end up discarding like some good chunk of these things if they, don't work. Um, but I appreciated that as like a paying attention to outside of the need for creativity from the X's and O's side, but the need for creativity from like a vibes perspective.
Yeah, I think that I feel a lot of that as a fan too. And I think I place a lot of my excitement into new players joining the roster, but it can also come in the form of just new ideas and new ways to play defensively and in offense, like
That's
getting
music to Josh Kroenke's ears.
getting Mike something to do on offense, like running through him a little bit more, going to zone more on defense, like Adelman said he wanted to do. Just something that can freshen it up. I mean, thankfully, I don't know. Thankfully, I don't want to say that, but Malone's not there anymore. So just by Adelman being a new coach, probably is going to bring some excitement. Though they already experienced him in the playoffs, how much of that will carry over into next season? But hopefully, there's a lot of runway for them to enjoy Adelman as the coach. So that's a positive thing. And I do wonder what the vets specifically are going to try to be working on. Like, hopefully, AG keeps practicing his shot. Hopefully, he can have a healthier season next year. Jamal's got to be in shape. Maybe he'll come into shape into training camp for the first time in his career. Who knows?
I completely like we're gonna get to DA's comments about the conditioning stuff, but the Jamal thing specifically, it's so fascinating how sort of we talked on our last show about how, following the playoffs, with Mike and Russ specifically, they had a really rough series, especially against OKC, but with Mike, it was both series. Especially, and you were like, well, we could attribute it to the shoulder, but we could also say, like, this is just how Mike has looked against physical defenses in the playoffs, right? With Jamal, it's interesting because of this conditioning question has been an issue for his entire career, but when you look at his last 4 off seasons straight, he's had a really good excuse for the way that he comes into the season, right? Because last year it was the Olympics. The year before that, it was coming off of the title. The year before that, he was coming off of ACL rehab. The year before that, was that was he wasn't coming back because he had the ACL. So actually 5, because the year before that, it was the bubble with the 1 month off season, and, like, Jamal and a bunch of other guys that made the conference finals or later got injured that year in, like, terrible fashion. They had all short off seasons and whatever. Who knows if you can attribute it to that, but it was like, well, everyone's gonna that's 5 years in a row that, like, I don't like, it could be Jamal, right? Because it's not like other guys didn't come off a championship run or play in the Olympics and all of that. But it's sort of like, well, each of these excuses has sort of augmented the thing that we sort of know about him already, or at least thought about him. He has an opportunity to change that narrative if he comes, into the season in shape. But
Well, should
yeah, I just
so
wanted
should
to.
should fans actually consider so much context with their opinions, Grace?
No, absolutely not.
No, but what I was gonna say too, just to add on to that point, is Jokic said that playing in the Olympics might have made him play better coming into the season, which I thought was an interesting point. And I think, yeah,
Play
Voya,
better, but Jokic was also not in the best shape when he showed up to training camp. Like, he was definitely on the bigger side, and I know, like, Ogie in some interviews early in the season, Stojakovic on the Nuggets coaching staff talked about how some of that was intentional, but it's like, it's also kinda convenient. I was looking back at the, some clips from the title run, I'm like, "Huh, Jokic was quite a bit smaller than he is
oh
today," is
yeah,
all I'm that's all I'm saying is, like, playing better, yeah, obviously, right? Like, Jokic was, like, MVP favorite through the first however many games this season. He was doing, like, crazy things, especially on offense, but, um, as we that's, like, a separate question from, like, overall conditioning and, like, what you're giving on both ends of the floor and that kinda thing, but
but I do think there's something to it. And Voya Medic, who are a friend from Twitter and who joined our show for the Olympic preview that we did, talked about how important it can be for players to play with FIBA rules or in the Olympics or in the summer, and how a lot of those guys come back and have improved seasons in the NBA than they previously had. And I do think there's something about like keeping your tools sharp by playing in that
sure.
competition. I don't know how much fatigue factors into it playing in the Olympics. So it can go both ways a little
Jamal was
bit.
also recovering from an
Yes,
injury that he had at the end of the season. He probably shouldn't have played in the Olympics. I think fans of Team Canada might agree with us based on his performance there.
that's the thing
Yeah.
is I thought for sure Jamal would come into this season looking really good because of the narratives around him, but he was injured, still dealing with possibly plantar fasciitis, I think he said right at
Oh,
the
I forgot
beginning of
about
the
that. Yeah,
season.
that too.
And he was up for the contract extension. And according to all those reports, was maybe on the trade block. So it was like, I kind of get why maybe he took it a little easy in that offseason with the extension and all that. So
With the exception of playing in the Olympics. It was just, like, very incongruous, like, very more tumultuous summer than we might have and on top of all that, he was a new father, which we learned later, way later. At least got it confirmed way later, so there's a lot going on there.
I'm back to expecting that he'll fully come back in shape. And then I could be disappointed. Like, fool me 6 times, shame on me for
Yeah.
the fifth time.
We talked about training camp, hopefully guys come in shape and, part of I think, coming back in shape is having something exciting to come back to, right? So I think that's part of what Adelman is going for here. Still on what Adelman will do differently, he talked about wanting to be a lot more creative defensively, similar to how they were in the playoffs. He's like, "I wanna play more zone." Like, he was pretty explicit about that point, especially because, quote, "We have high IQ guys, high IQ players that can, execute some more creative defensive schemes that aren't so, physically taxing as some of the more aggressive schemes." I Okay. So I wanna add an additional quote to this because Adelman actually gave an interview to Altitude Sports Radio after his introductory presser. In that interview, he actually mentioned, actually, that was where he mentioned the one in the summer having guys kind of focus on 1 or 2 things that they can add to their game. So if you don't remember that quote from the press conference, that's where I got it from if you wanna check out his interview with Altitude Sports. The other quote that I have here is, from him mentioning that toward the end of his career, Tim Duncan with the Spurs got to basically just zone up and, like, hang out around the rim a lot and kinda direct traffic on defense. They were kinda playing man, but not really when it came to him. And that's sort of him pointing to that example specifically sort of shades the comments about defensive creativity having less to do with what we wanna take away from other teams and more to do with getting our guys through the regular season physically intact, and especially Jokic. Um, I do have Before I get to that, actually, why don't I get your impression on the defensive creativity side of things, how that
Mhm.
ties into, what he did in the playoffs and all of that?
I like the idea of maybe using more zone because, like, Hastings asked him, like, that's a good way to get him some rest while he's still in the game by using some zone. But like Adelman said smartly, they do have to get better at it because there are a lot of times in a zone where Jokic can be left on a low man type position and anyone can just back cut from there or just drive right past him baseline and score because he just can't move in space super quickly. So they're going to have to really get used to playing it with Jokic and those around him by, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but covering up some of his deficiencies in that scheme. But the like zone they were playing was kind of like a rare one that's not in the NBA a lot. They could do different types of
Was that the
formations of
1-3-1?
zone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's other zones that they could do and try and like use in specific situations, but it's like,
No more 2-3 zone, they're so lazy with it. Like,
yeah.
that's the look that everybody's citing, by the way. That was not the one that helped us get stops. That was just, like, weird one. They'd start every, like, 1st quarter in, like, game 1, and I hated it, and because the other team was immediately scoring on it because nobody's flying around, like, it was a mess. The question I have about this, though, is based on comments that we heard from Matt Moore over at Locked On Nuggets throughout the season when Malone was there, especially toward the end, where the reason that they play so much of their base scheme in the regular season, obviously things changed in the playoffs after DA took over, is that some guys were struggling to handle the, mental burden associated with some of these newer schemes. So they're playing like their normal like at level and man defense because or just switching because it's simpler, and there are guys that, are struggling to execute these coverages. So, you could look at it, not so generously and be like, "Well, I don't know how this is gonna last," when you're talking about an expanded rotation. Because let's say in the playoffs, like, yeah, you've got your 7 guys, 6.5 guys, where everybody's locked into the scheme, so we can make that work. It gets a lot more complicated when you have more people that, have to be on the same page and know what's coming in, knowing their personnel, all this stuff, and you're not talking about just, like, basic base defensive coverages that the team is used to. Looking at it generously, you can say this is Adelman issuing a mental challenge to the entire team and saying, "This is how I want us to play, and I know that you guys have it in you to." Uh, there was reporting that Mike had never played zone prior to the Clipper series. That's her. Hurricane Teabag. I know who this is.
Hurricane, thanks for being
That's
here.
not true. They've definitely played zone for stretches in the past. It was just at much higher volume, and they tried a couple of different zones out in the playoffs. But right, the generous interpretation of this from Adelman is like, I know you guys are smart enough to get this, whether you as a fan agree or not. It's him challenging the team to be like, this is how I want us to play, and it's actually going to help you get through the regular season, and it's going to, help us be better in May if we can execute this stuff in, you know, December. Any thoughts on the pace discussion? Yes, we're going to talk about that in our next section, which I had one more thing about the defense, which was just nobody asked if we're going to force more turnovers. I would like to know Adelman's thoughts on this, just because Denver is consistently like falling way, way, way back of the league in this regard. Even though they actually forced more turnovers this year, everybody forced even more. So they actually fell in terms of turnover percentage relative to the rest of the league.
Does that become like a trend? People really trying to get that up with the OKC Thunder
Right,
having
just
as
to
much
sort of,
success. The
you know,
copycat league.
it is a copycat league, that is for sure. And I think on a previous show, I'm going to look this up right now with turnover percentage. When you're looking at the top 10 defenses, uh half of them this season were top 10 in turnover percentage, like opponent turnover percentage. So, you what you'd like to see there, actually, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, no, 6 of them. And none of them were bottom 10 except for Boston. Like, that's just a team that, thrives on their positional defense. So if Denver's gonna get up there or close to it, it feels like that's an area where they don't have to, like, be top 3 in forcing turnovers, but it needs to be more of an emphasis than it is, and that it really isn't right now. Right. Okay. So we'll talk about the pace discussion because Adelman wants to handle the regular season quite a bit differently than last year. So we talked about how DA is going to, do things a little bit differently with our defense, with the summers, and how he's going to handle training camp. Uh, the next section I have here is how Adelman wants to handle the regular season. And I think this is a good set of questions because obviously we get 3 regular season games at the end of the year with Adelman, and then from there on, it's like, I'm a playoff coach now. Like, I don't know how much you can take away from his overall performance in the playoffs, relative to being a regular season coach, because I just think the 82 game grind, even though I think the regular season matters, I do think it is different fundamentally than the playoffs. It kind of takes, it works a different part of your brain both as a player and as a coach, right? And different parts of your body even when you consider the physical toll of that grind. All right. So first set of questions, totally in line and expected, is like, how are you gonna deal with, getting these young guys to develop to where you need them, when you're trying to win games. And Adam was just like, we're gonna try to balance winning with development. So, this is what a head coach will do, right? Or will say, it's like, my job is to win games, right? Um, we talked earlier about wanting guys to come back into the regular season, or come back at the beginning of the regular season conditioned. And Adelman made a really big point about wanting to get off to a better start next season. And part of that is the conditioning question. Um, because he sort of sees it as a way to be able to quote unquote maintenance the roster throughout the year if you're able to get off to a better start, especially in a very competitive Western Conference. Will, how different does any of this sound from Malone so far?
Well, Malone always talks about how he wants to improve the defense and be like a top 5 defense. And I feel like he didn't say as much about conditioning,
Mm,
except for in like exit interview type press conferences. It's almost like used as an excuse rather than like setting it as a goal. I could be wrong about that, but I mean, I like the idea of getting off to a good start, and I like the idea of trying to get something to excite the players through the regular season. And I don't know if it's me projecting my feelings on the regular season because I am pretty thirsty to get to the playoffs a lot of the times. And I think the Nuggets, after winning the championship, wanting to play like playoff basketball and like tactical basketball, they're pretty impatient in that regard. So they're going to have to find a way to take the regular season a little bit more seriously than we have the past 2 seasons, I believe. So Jay Kerr says, wondering if Nuggets hoping that MPJ goes on a brief hot streak to increase his capital, then trade him. Should he improve his mid range? Um, yeah, well, when we hire a GM finally, maybe that's some things he can answer about what he sees with the team and what approach we might take at a deadline type of question, which we'll find out after the summer's ended if there's any trades that happen or not, and when training camp starts for sure. Um, is that part of the strong start? Is that a lot of these guys had worked on their games in the summer, as we just talked about with the young guys, and we don't know necessarily what skills the vets are going to add, but he definitely wants more shooters, more consistent shooting. I don't know if you have that lined up in a specific segment, Grace, but you know,
Yeah, we're definitely gonna talk about the shooting. It's more on the Josh Kroenke internal development conversation.
should the
Should the
Nuggets
Nuggets threaten Jamal Murray with a massive fine if he doesn't come to camp in shape? No, because the Players Association is not gonna let that fly.
yeah.
The comment that we had about Mike and, like, improving his trade value and all of this, I don't think that DA's comments about starting the regular season had literally anything to do with Michael Porter Jr. He was our second best player through mid-December last year. He seems to always come ready to go. He does well in the early parts of the season. MPJ really tailed off after the All-Star break, which was both following the hamstring injury that he sustained right before the All-Star break, and I believe it was right after the All-Star break that he broke his drop foot brace and had to get a new one. The old one he had fully broken in over years, and the new one, the brace that he wears to, deal with the nerve damage from his last back surgery that sort of makes it so he can't fully operate his, is it both feet or just the one? I don't know. Um, the new brace, like, he has to break it in, and obviously as a shooter, like, if your balance is off, you're kinda cooked, and that's basically what we saw at the end of the year. It wasn't just the playoffs, but obviously that's another thing that plays into sort of the list of bullet points for MPJ to have, like, pretty decent excuses for his showing in the playoffs, if we're being honest. MPJ's regular seasons are largely not an issue. He did go through, like, a mini slump around the time that, like, the Zach LaVine rumors came out. It's just the 1 foot, thank you, hurricane teabag. Um, but yeah, I'm not worried about Mike, caring enough to come into the regular season in shape. That's not really, you know
I don't know if you guys remember the narratives around Mike at the beginning of the season was like, whoa, it's the best shape he's been in. He's a workhorse. He's played 80 games in these last two regular seasons, things like that.
Yeah.
Just kind of falls apart in the playoffs every once in a while. Or, I mean, I get that is a big deal. I'm not trying to minimize it. It's just, yeah, I agree. His regular seasons aren't terrible. I don't, it's just like up in the air whether they're trying to trade him or not and what they think the priority should be with the
He
team and
played
how.
77 games this year. I think the
Yeah.
only starter who played more was Christian,
Yep.
by the way. Um, oh, go
Miseria
ahead.
says Malone hope Jamal will read between the lines. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But I think overall, like the sentiment is DA made it clear he wants the players to come in ready to go, to get off to a fast start. Hopefully it was a productive summer, like improving parts of your game, simplifying parts of your game. And we'll see what they do roster wise and how to like add some more consistency to the bench, which I'm sure is on their radar.
If you do like our content, please remember to click the like button and the subscribe button. Also, hit the notification bell. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks, because then you don't have to watch other teams take your spot in the NBA Finals.